Good morning. So about 3 weeks ago, I was in the process of gathering information and preparing for today's seminar, and I had no idea how real this topic would become to me and my family. In the middle of the night, we received a call that my husband's oldest son had passed away. And I've been practicing this without tears, so. So over the next few weeks, we went through the process that most grieving families go through. And it became very apparent to me that if we had had this information that we're going to share with you today, that we probably could have avoided at least some of the emotional and the financial strain. So our family's crisis was unexpected, just like most crises that occur in our lives, especially as we get older. At Seacoast Seniors, our goal is to help educate you so that when a crisis does occur, you will make knowledge-driven decisions as opposed to crisis-driven decisions. Does that sound good to you? Yes. Okay, great. Well, my name is Nancy Puter, and I will be your host today. I'm the founder of Seacoast Seniors and also a real estate broker with Keller Williams. You may be wondering why a realtor would want to do seminars to educate seniors. Well, after many years of working in the real estate industry, I found myself in situations where family member needed to be moved quickly, and by the time they brought me into the situation, I was walking into total chaos. And I used to wonder, where are the people to help these people? And I would do the best I could to fulfill my role, which was basically just selling the house and to help however I could. But I often wondered, why isn't there someone helping? So, I have seen the best families make uninformed decisions that might be good for them, but not so much for the adult family member. I've seen families torn apart, and I've sat with many families while they made agonizing decisions. And it was frustrating for me because as I was on the outside looking in, it was obvious to me that with a little bit of pre-planning, a lot of the chaos could have been eliminated. So one day it occurred to me that I might be the person that seemed to be missing in action during the crisis and help older adults and equip them through education so they could make good decisions in advance and have some knowledge that is so necessary. And that is how Seacoast Seniors was born. So before we get started, I'd like to take a quick moment to appreciate my team members, Bailey, who you met when you came in, and our handsome videographer in the back, Marcel. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors. We appreciate our sponsors. The sponsors that came today, are you in the room? Could you please stand? We especially appreciate our sponsors because they not only are great at what they do, but they also financially help us so that we can continue to give these seminars free. Thank you. All of these people have busy schedules, including our panelists, so we really appreciate the time that they're taking today to make sure that you have the information that you need so you can have a good life. So, you'd think I wouldn't have to read this after all these times, but I do. So we'll begin to interview our panelists in a few moments, and today we're going to talk about myths and truths that are relevant to our panelists in individual industry. And before we get started, I just want to say the restrooms are out the door to the right on the other side of the staircase. Both the men's room and the women's room is out there. And if you want to get up during the seminar, it's perfectly fine. Yes? Who are the sponsors? I am so sorry. They are on the banner in the back, and the sponsors that we're having that are here today are Clarice with Tidy Living, and what Clarice does is she helps you deal with your stuff. Where to put it, what to sell, what to move. I mean, she is a stuff expert. And, and then Samantha is with Senior Living Consultants, and they are a free placement agency, and they are experts on all of the 180 senior living communities in this area. And their services are completely free to you. We also have a sponsor, Zoe Rytel with Envoy Mortgage, who specializes in reverse mortgages, and Dylan Deaton with Estate 360, who does estate sales. And of course, Nancy Pewter and Associates is a sponsor. So I'd like to point out a few handouts on your table. The first one is for note-taking. So feel free to jot down any questions you have, because we're going to have a question and answer session when all the interviews are done. And I would appreciate it if you'd hold your questions till the end. The second page is an action item page where you can begin to make your plan for things that you want to do after you leave today. And then we have an evaluation sheet, which we very much appreciate you filling out, because it helps us make our seminars better each time. On the evaluation sheet, you can also sign up for our next seminar if you like. But be sure to leave a contact number so that we can confirm with you later on. When we're finished, you can pick up materials at the back table where our sponsors and panelists will be. And as always, we're here to educate and equip, not sell. So please know that if we can be of service to you, we're here to help. But we're only here to be a resource for you, and no one's going to try to get you to do anything that you don't want to do. So let's get started. Our panelists are going to introduce themselves, and we've provided them with a list of the most common myths, or they've provided me with the most common myths and truths that are relative to their industry. So let's start with Kevin. Kevin, would you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
My name is Kevin Owens. I'm an attorney. I practice in San Luis Obispo. I've had my office there for 20 years. I do a lot of estate planning, trusts, trust packages. I do probate, and I do business law. But my first love is estate planning and doing trusts. And I got that way. Well, when it happened, I was privileged to be at my parents' house the last week of my mother's life. And my father was full of questions about what comes next, and when, and how much, and oh my gosh. And I had taken a wills class in college, in law school, but it was very academic and theoretical and lawyerly. You know, he's asking me rubber hit the road questions, and I had no answers. And I said to him, you know what, let's go to the mortuary. Those guys do this all day, every day. They will have answers to your questions. And we did, and they did. And it was wonderful for my dad, because it gave him a lot of information to deal with and to work with. And I reflected on that after my mother's passing, that what difference that made of these gentlemen being able to impart language to him, or information to him that helped him through this difficult time. And that's when I decided to be an estate planning attorney. And because the probate code is a very arcane body of work, and you don't ever come across it. I would say 80% of the lawyers don't come across it until the situation arises, because it's just not part of everyday life for most attorneys. And I just realized it was a place where attorneys could really be of service to people, to explain the difficulties and the complications and the ramifications of actions and inactions. And so that was more than 20 years ago when I made that decision, and I've loved every minute of it. You know, Warren Buffett says, enjoy what you do and you'll never work a day in your life.
Amen.
I'm living proof of that.
Good morning. My name is Luke Andrini. I'm the manager and director at Lady Family Mortuary. We're in Arroyo Grande. And I've been a funeral director for 10 years now. And my whole career I've only served South County. And I really like the people here. And, you know, I find these seminars in any way to get out information about helping people to plan ahead, because I know firsthand how difficult it is when you don't. And and I'm actually glad to see so many people interested, you know, in learning about this today. So I'm looking forward to hopefully giving you some of my knowledge today. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Linda Beck. I'm an elder and health advocate. I'm also the president of Slow Village. Slow Village is an organization. It's not a physical location. And we're a nonprofit group that is dedicated to supporting older adults, independents, people who are living in their own homes, often need a little bit of help with things like changing the light bulb in the ceiling so you don't fall off the ladder, getting to where you need to go if you no longer drive, and remaining engaged in your community. We do that by providing services through vetted volunteers, and also by conducting regular social events. We have a monthly lunch bunch, coffee group, movie group, and a group that gets together as a circle of friends to discuss deeper subjects. So we're part of this whole constellation of services for people who are aging independently and want to remain in control of essentially of their fates. This is all part of the same system.
Good morning, I'm Chris Kington Barker. I'm the Executive Director for Hospice of San Luis Obispo County. We are very fortunate in this county that we have two different kinds of hospices. We are a volunteer hospice, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about what that is as we talk about hospice and I answer some of those questions. We have 4 hospices here in this county, and the hospice that I'm with is the one that was the first hospice in this county. We've been around going on 42 years.
Thank you. Luke. Okay, so we're going to start with myth number 1, and I think Luke and maybe Kevin might want to comment on this one. So myth number 1, life insurance will take care of my funeral expenses.
Right. Life insurance is always good to have, of course, especially a policy that has a specific death benefit. It's just easier to file the claim later. But what I find, people come into my office, they know they have the policy and expect it to just handle the arrangements. They can hand it over to me, and that's the end of it. And that's rarely the case. A funeral home likes to be paid usually up front. Most funeral homes do. So what happens most of the time is the family pays out of pocket, and then the insurance company reimburses them. So that's kind of an extra step and can be really inconvenient, especially for younger generations that are having to take care of the arrangements. You know, they shell out a few $1,000s can be a lot. So some funeral homes will take an assignment on the insurance policy. Usually comes at a fee. So my ultimate recommendation, if you can set up a plan with the funeral home directly and pay for that with them, that's the best way to go. That's when your family can just say it is taken care of. The funeral home is already paid. All they have to worry about is setting the time either for the funeral service, or if even that, it just makes the plan much more automatic. So again, I would go to the funeral home directly to pay for that.
Kevin, do you want to add to that?
Just one thought I had when I read that, which is the devil's in the details. An insurance policy is a contract, and so it depends how it's written. Who's the beneficiary of that policy? Who's receiving that money? The law says that money belongs to the person who is named as the beneficiary. Now everybody in the family says, no, wait a minute, that money is for the funeral expenses. Well, that can be dicey, right? Maybe there's an unpleasant conversation that happens there, and it's all about avoiding unpleasant conversations as much as possible.
Good. So how about this myth? I can donate my body to science and my family won't have to worry about anything.
I get that all the time, and it's a sort of a way to get around paying for services. It's not the worst idea. Most of the time, believe it or not, you have to set this up ahead of time with it's usually a school, and a lot of times it actually comes with cost, if you can believe it. I will say these days there are more companies now that are accepting of the body. They're private companies that basically buy and sell deceased people for either scientific research. Actually, that's all it is, scientific research. So they are becoming more common, but it is something you have to set up beforehand. If you pass away and nothing's set up, likely we won't be able to have your body donated. So usually a good place to start is there's a company called Science Care. They're reputable, and I've worked with them. They'd be someone to look into, or a place like UCLA, USC is, I see a lot of bodies go there for donation. The funeral home might step in to help the transfer to the facility or to whoever is going to have the body donation. So a funeral home still steps in sometimes to at least help you with that transition.
Okay, great. The first several questions are mainly directed towards Luke and Kevin, but we are going to get to Linda and Chris too. How about, my family knows I want the cheapest funeral possible. And let's see, my family knows I want the cheapest funeral available, so that's what they will do.
Yeah, that's the old, I'll just throw my body in that gutter, or, shoot me in a cannon off in the ocean. It's a common thing to say, and fair enough. I haven't thrown anyone in the ocean yet, but that's usually, the problem with that is, especially say with the kids really want to honor your wishes more than anything else. But funerals are for the living, as we say. So a lot of times going the cheapest route, the family still wants to have maybe some sort of service, just something to mark that the passing has occurred. So just sort of dismissing it and saying, well, just do the absolute bare minimum. I still recommend at least being a little more detailed, even talking with the funeral home, getting something in writing, especially. That way I can tell the family, well, look, mom or dad wanted a cremation or a burial. Simple doesn't necessarily mean cremation, right? So, especially when it comes to religious beliefs, what's simple to the Catholic is not simple to, say, anyone else, Lutheran, Protestant, because what's accepted is different. So it still needs to be laid out clearly what you mean by simplest arrangements. Okay, and of course, let's say at the end, if you are cremated, we still have to decide what's going to happen with your cremated remains. So that also leaves a lot of decisions that still have to be made by the family. That's the last thing they want to do, because again, they're worried about, they want to make you proud. They want to feel like they're honoring your wishes, and if that decision wasn't made ahead of time, that adds a lot of stress to the situation.
Luke, would you also say that families often spend 2 to 3 times more on a funeral than they need to, than their loved one would have wanted, because their decisions are made emotionally?
Definitely. Of course, you hear of, some funeral homes might, push merchandise on you and families, and it certainly happens. It is a business. We're here to make a profit. I know our funeral home, we've never felt the need to really push anything on the family, but that's when the emotions are heightened. Realistically, you are going to, it'd be so easy for me to put a catalog in front of you and you're going to want half of everything that's in there. It's a very emotional time, so if it is laid out beforehand, you can, save your family from maybe making those unnecessary decisions. So that's a good point.
So 60% of our veterans believe their funeral services will be covered because they served our country.
Right. They do a little bit, but you certainly will not pay for the full cremation or burial. It's very rare that they do. What they do offer is a place in a national cemetery, any veteran's cemetery. A veteran is entitled to a plot, a headstone, and an honor guard for the memorial service. As far as paying for the actual burial, there's actually no help, unfortunately. I have heard of a death benefit through the VA, but they only pay that out to, I believe, active service members, and you have to have been in the military at least 4 years, and even then it could take up to a year to get that money, so I wouldn't count on it.
Okay, Luke. So I'm going to skip number 5 because I think we've covered that one. Number 6, Linda. How would you respond to getting older getting older means becoming less useful?
I would say that that is one of the great ageist myths of our society. Older adults are perhaps our largest untapped resource, and the burden, unfortunately, is still on the older adult to find a place to make their value relevant to what's going on around them. There are a huge variety of ways to do this. A lot of people find that they can participate in community through a faith-based organization, through a learning organization like Lifelong Learners of the Central Coast, which is one place where people get together to share their experiences and their knowledge. The village movement, of which Slow Village is one small part, there are about 350 villages around the country, is really focused on creating a place for older adults to validate their purpose, to find a new way to engage with their peers, and to continue to participate in their lives.
Great. Now let's go back to Luke for just a moment. Luke, what would you say to, there is no need for a visitation or a service. I'm dead, and there's no sense in spending the money.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to what I was saying, that funerals are for the living. That's what most of us forget when we're planning ahead. Sometimes it's hard to describe why we really need that, but that's I feel people need an occasion to really mark the passing of someone they've loved, and it's also healing to more distant relatives, and just we tend to gain friends as we go through life, and it also helps them to process the very even their own mortality. The fact that they see people coming together to celebrate someone's life, I've always found is actually a morale boost for everyone that comes there. It shows that, hey, we're willing to take the time, we're willing to travel, a lot of times halfway across the country to acknowledge this person's life. And I think when people leave, you feel good, thinking that, hey, people do care about you. Even through life, it feels like, gosh, we're alone. I find a funeral proves us wrong every time. So that's why I always recommend a service. Not everyone wants it, and it's okay, but if you can plan ahead for one, it's definitely very good for your family.
Well, thank you, Luke. So back to Linda. As you age, you aren't interested in or cannot understand technology.
One word, hogwash. The people who are, speak for yourself, Kevin. The group that is moving into the baby boomers, the so-called silver tsunami, are the people who created technology. And we have a great many people in our community who were at the core of Silicon Valley. They worked for Hewlett-Packard, Varian, and many of the other companies that are legendary names and persist to this day in different forms. Technology has grown, as I'm sure you all recognize, enormously and very, very fast, which means that we can't all keep up on every single app that comes out. However, older adults use technology at a rate that is at least equal to the younger generations. It's a matter of finding the devices and the applications that work best for you. One thing I do want to point out is that technology does carry risks with it. And unfortunately, the internet has become a very fertile hunting ground for scammers of all kinds. So you need to exercise some common sense and discretion in the ways that you use technology.
Thank you, Linda. And what would you say to this myth? There is no way to age successfully. It's just a downhill decline.
Oh, my goodness. Well, everybody who believes that, raise their hand, please. No, I don't either. And again, it's a matter of finding your purpose and balancing that against the changes that many people do experience as they age. We may not walk as fast, we may not remember phone number, well, you don't have to remember phone numbers anymore, so let me try something else. You may not remember names the way you once did, but there are definitely both subjective advantages of aging. I find that I've developed perspective that things that once would have sent me into a tailspin are just, oh well. But we have to realign our expectations as we age, and that's an ongoing process.
Thank you. Kevin, how would you answer the comment, staying in my home at all costs proves that I'm still independent?
Well, what jumped out at me about that was, at all costs, that person is painting themselves into a corner, first of all. And part and parcel of that is, what comes with that is a certain rigidity that becomes a lifestyle and ultimately a mindset. And so that's the key for me in that, is maintaining flexibility. People need to constantly explore the options that are available to them. And by maintaining flexibility, they will be maintaining vitality. And so that's something that I encounter a lot when I'm doing an estate plan. And my role there then is to ask questions of people and say, well, why do you think that? Or how did you get there? Well, what about this? What if this were to happen? And you get people thinking, oh gee, this is a little bit more involved here than I realized, and then you start having a better conversation.
Great. And Kevin?
May I add just
Oh, sure.
small piece to that?
Sure, thank you, Linda.
One of the things that we talk a lot about in the Village Movement is that independence is really interdependence. And the idea that someone chooses to become isolated in their own home as a statement of their independence is very unfortunate and overall does not play out well. The studies that have been done on aging and isolation tell us that the people who find a way to remain connected. Hello, AV assistance, please. Never mind, I'm just going to talk. That they find a way to remain engaged in their community are the people who have the best experience of aging overall. So
Don't want to go over there.
I suggest that this is perhaps one of the most dangerous myths that we're talking about today.
Okay, Kevin, my longevity planning is complete when I've done my will and estate plan.
Well, the bad news is you're never done. It's never complete. And the reason is there are changes all the time. There are changes in the law. There are changes in your family. And, I'm very frequently doing, nowadays, I've been doing this 20 years, and I have clients coming back to have their documents redone and adjusted to the current situation. And far more frequently, it's changes in the family that necessitate the adjustment and the fine-tuning of the instruments. But there are dramatic changes in the law every now and then. The last really big one was in 2010. It really changed the landscape of estate planning and estate taxation. And so that is also something that's out there. But you're never done. It's important to periodically review your documents. When was the last time you read your trust? I just got a new client, and she's never read the trust, and it turns out there's a pretty bad mistake in the trust. And fortunately, we're going to be able to do something about it. But mistakes do happen, and you have to pay attention. But it means staying in touch. Stay in touch, and stay tuned, and stay involved.
Great. Well, we're finally going to hear from Chris, I believe. We didn't forget about you.
I'm fine.
Chris, how would you answer the statement that enrolling in hospice means giving up on living?
That's always an interesting question, because enrolling in hospice, I'll go into a definition of two different kinds of hospices, and I think what that speaks to is, for a medically certified hospice, the individual needs to be estimated to be within the last 6 months of their life. A physician referring to that hospice needs to feel that that individual is reasonably expected to die within 6 months. So people interpret that as though it's a death sentence, that they're told, that's it, you've got 6 months or less to live. In fact, it's always a guess. What it is actually saying is that the condition of the individual is such that there is no more curative treatment that is known for the person, and that person may continue to live for much longer than 6 months, but the person has decided that they're no longer going to participate in efforts at curative treatment through chemotherapy, through experimental drugs, through experimental treatment. That what they're doing is they're allowing nature to take its course. If that means that something on the horizon comes around that is curative, they can always go to that. If it means that their body goes into a natural kind of a recession, it can go to that. But what it means is they're no longer seeking curative treatment. And when people seek curative treatment, what we hear from them is they're always looking for more time. That if we say, what is it that you're hoping for from this treatment, if the treatment is experimental, what we hear from people is, I want more time. And when we look at that from that individual, what we want to know is, what if this is your more time? If this is your more time now, what would you rather be doing with it? So hospice is, how can we help you do what you want to do and live the whatever time you've got, whether that be weeks, months, years, doing the things that give you pleasure for yourself and for your family. I'll just leave it with that.
Okay. And one thing that I don't think Chris mentioned earlier is Hospice of San Luis Obispo County is all volunteer, right? A strictly volunteer.
13 staff and 200 volunteers.
And their services are completely free.
Correct. There are two different kinds of hospices. There is what's called a volunteer hospice, and that was the original model of all hospices in the nation up until the 1980s. In all of the ones that existed in that time, and Hospice SLO was one of those were grandfathered in. They were given a choice of whether or not they wanted to go on to be medically certified, and that meant that they would get financial reimbursement through Medicare and through insurances. In order to do that, however, Medicare and the federal government put rules on what patients could be accepted, when they could be brought on service, how many staff you had to have, who could be paid and who could not be paid, how the operations would be conducted. Our organization and the board decided to stay with the original model. The original model was always established to work hand in glove with medical agencies like home health, who delivered the medical services, and we delivered the emotional support and the practical support and the spiritual support to the individuals. There was never any limit on when individuals could get on our services, and there was never any rules around who could access our grief counseling services. The caveat was, in order for Hospice SLO or any other volunteer hospice to remain a volunteer hospice, it needed to stay with the original model, which was you could not charge for any services. So we've done that for the last 41 years. We do not charge the individuals, the families, or insurances for services. And we work alongside the medical hospices who charge Medicare, who charge the insurance companies for the medical side of the services.
You know, I'm going to change number 13, and I'm going to ask you, what do I do if I'm on hospice and I have animals, pets, in my home?
It is so common now for people to have animals as an extension of their family. We found that growing, and when I came to hospice 10 years ago, it was something that we were finding with the volunteers in the home were frequently faced with. We often found that for some of the individuals, we're giving up their own medication to buy medication for their animals that were aging, because it had to be one or the other. We found in some situations with seniors who had food issues that they were feeding their animals first. So we decided to put together a service that allowed us to bring in and train volunteers specifically to attend to the animals. We have two kinds of services. We have individuals who provide volunteer support services to the individuals, to the humans, and then we have volunteers that are trained specifically for animals. They're trained for animals who are responding to humans who are going through their end of life, because animals respond. They know it, and they sense it, and they react to it. It's a way for us to support those animals and to help those humans know that there's somebody caring for those animals. We also take custody of those animals when the human dies, and we find foster homes for them. We seek training for them if they've got behavioral issues that are going to prevent them to be rehomed, and then we rehome them. So we've done everything from horse to macaws to cats and dogs. And it's something that we have individuals who have stayed in unsafe, one of the things that was talked about is how long an independent staying in your own home at all costs. Sometimes all costs can be a person's safety, and they don't want to leave their own home because they don't want to leave their animals, because they don't think anybody will love them or take care of them as well as they can. Maybe it's a 15-year-old dog. We don't want that to happen, so we'll take over for that.
And the program's called?
The program's called Pet Peace of Mind.
So, Chris, are you comfortable answering this one? Because I know you are a non-medical hospice, but the myth that hospice is expensive, my family won't be able to afford it. Can you address that one?
Yeah. Hospice and the medical services for hospice are covered by insurance. They're covered by Medicare. They're covered by other kinds of medical insurance, including if you've got a Medicare HMO. They're covered by pretty much all medical insurances. There is some difficulty for individuals who live in areas where they've got an HMO that is attached to something like a Kaiser. They need to go and receive that within the area that their insurance is covered. But for the most part, insurance covers the cost of all medical expenses related to hospice. What one needs to understand, however, is that once an individual is on a medically certified hospice, what isn't covered is treatments that are considered curative. What one isn't covered for is in and out of hospitals. If the person wants to be taken to the hospital, if they have issues related to their illness, then they need to really look at whether or not they want to be on a medical hospice. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're not ready for that yet. But generally it is covered. For individuals who have no insurance, all hospices do have in this area some kind of a fund that they provide to assist people with that kind of coverage.
Thank you.
Chris, I think it's also important to talk about what hospice, either medical or volunteer, does not cover.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people are misinformed or uninformed. Hospice provides specific services, but the day-to-day care is left with the family or the other community for the patient. A lot of people simply aren't prepared for that. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah. And that's a different kind of question, but I do think Linda makes a really good point. Families often think when they go onto a medical hospice that there are going to be nurses, aides, individuals that come with that service that are now going to be coming into the home that's going to be delivering the care. Home health or hospice that's delivered in the home is provided predominantly by the family or by caregivers. The nurse for a hospice agency will come 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 times a week for a check-in, typically for an hour visit. It will be for education for the family to teach them about how to administer medications, how to do treatments, how to turn and position the patient, educate about where they are in their disease process. A social worker may make a visit once a month. It may be once a week, rarely that often, but those are people that there may be a spiritual counselor who's available. Depending on how busy the staff is on those hospices will make a difference in terms of how frequently they can come to each family. Often families think when a person goes on hospice, finally now I get relief. Someone's going to come to the house, there'll be somebody there at night who will be able to stay with my loved one, I can get sleep. It just doesn't happen that way. The family is still giving the medication, doing all the things that they were doing before. Hospice care does not cover hiring a private aide or a private nurse to come in for round-the-clock care. The insurance does not cover that. That needs to be done privately, and it can be very expensive.
Thank you, Chris. Luke, I just want to go back to wills. I have heard myself, many times people say, I'm sorry, I meant Kevin, but you might want to comment on this too, Luke. All I need to do is to create a will. You guys can collaborate on this one. Is to write down my wishes on notebook paper and sign it.
Well, yes, technically you can do it. It's called a holographic will. It must be signed and dated. It must be, well, the best way to go is to have the entire will be entirely in the handwriting of the testator. And it needs to be signed and it needs to be dated. And there's a couple of other technicalities that I won't go into because time does not permit and you'd all fall asleep anyway. But it can be summed up in Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and holographic wills is just a minefield. There's so many things that can get overlooked, so many technical things in the weeds that can have disastrous results. And by that I mean the court will not accept it, and it's not. Now you're left with no will. If you die with a will or estate planning documents, you are said to have died testate. If you die with nothing, you have died intestate. About a third of the probate code is a section known as the intestacy laws. It's what happens when an estate comes to the court and there are no estate planning documents to guide the court. In that eventuality, the court will turn to the intestacy laws. And it's very mechanical, very cut and dried, and it is merciless. This is the table of consanguinity. And what this boils down to is the size of my piece of the pie is directly related to my closeness in blood to the deceased. Only blood relatives, only blood heirs participate in the intestacy laws. And as a knowledgeable friend of mine who is a senior escrow officer at a title company in town made this comment because she runs into it all the time. She said, there is no mercy in probate. That is exactly the case. So think for a second. You have a friend, she's a single mom, she has a 5-year-old daughter, and lovely young lady, bright as a penny, and she's going places. You know, she's gonna have a bright future. And you think to yourself, you know, when I get around to doing my estate plan, I'm going to give $5,000 to this girl for her college education and help out her mom. And you never get around to doing your estate planning documents. Well, the 5-year-old girl who lives across the street is not on this grid, and so your wishes will not be honored. So, in a word, don't. That's it. Don't do a handwritten will. Go meet with somebody who knows, has experience, can steer you away from imprecise language, which always causes trouble and arguments and bad feelings. Just don't do it.
And speaking of probate, because that's what would happen, is it would go into probate, correct? How long does probate generally go? How long does it take to go through the process, and how much does it cost?
The statutes expects it is structured so that a typical probate petition would run about 12 months. But it also says that if it hasn't been wrapped up in 18 months, then the estate must do a status report to the judge, to the court, explaining what happened. I was lucky to have one done that went really smoothly. The last one I did went 10 months, and then everybody was like, "Oh wow, that's pretty good." And it was just lucky. But it is a very slow process. It's a very public process. The assets of the estate are inventoried, and the names of the beneficiaries are identified. It's a public record. Anybody can see that. Can see the records of that case. As far as fees, this is I'm not going to read this whole thing. This is California Probate Code 10810. Copies of these are at the table in the back. Please help yourself. 10A10 is the statutory fee that a probate attorney can and will charge the estate. And I'll just read you the first two. These are gross values, not net values of the estate. The gross value of the estate. 4% of the first 100,000. Number two, 3% of the next 100,000. Now think about that. An estate of 200,000. That's not the most complicated estate in the world. But the attorney's going to charge $7,000, and he's going to get it. Why? Because that's the law. So probate is something to be avoided at all costs, really. And the way to do that is to have a family trust. The reason you have probate is because you die with assets in your name, my name. Kevin Owens, an individual. Well, I set up a family trust, and all of my assets are now titled Kevin Owens and my wife, trustees of the Owens Family Trust. Now, those aren't titled in my name anymore. They're titled in the trust. Simple as that. If they're not in my name, they're not going through probate. There are a couple of situations where you would go to probate court. Typically, it's where there's been something imprecise in the language. You know, something has developed in the family that the trust instrument does not address. And so you would go into probate court on what's called a petition for instructions. It's very narrowly focused on that very issue and nothing else. And the only part of the trust that is disclosed in the court documents is the section of the trust instrument that is in issue. And everything else in the trust document remains confidential. So that's, I can't say it will never happen. You'll never go to probate court, but it's a much better way than going through probate court. If you're in a probate petition, you have to get permission from the court for practically everything. And it's a very tedious process. Don't do it.
Luke, has anybody ever handed you just a piece of paper and then said, here, my dad wrote this, please take care of it?
Oh, yeah. And that's, Kevin is definitely the guy to see. Even though I don't deal with so much of the financial part, after someone passes away, but I know families that do have a trust set up, it's much easier to get things going. But as far as to the will, what I get them mostly for, and I think this is important, we don't think of this, but there's a strange, when a death occurs, I always say the best comes out in families, but also the worst. Okay? That sister you haven't talked to in 10 years, or that cousin that comes out of the woodworks and suddenly wants that truck, that's been sitting in the backyard, they come out of nowhere. And then they sometimes, a lot of times, kind of weasel their way into the arrangements. You're already stressed beyond, imagination, and now you're having to deal with relatives that you don't want to. So I mostly get these signed wills saying, hey, don't let Aunt Janine anywhere near my arrangements. Signed me. Sometimes almost in blood. Don't let him near it. So that's where, and from a funeral home standpoint, we have laws, thank goodness for me, is we only work with the next of kin. Whatever the next of kin says goes. We try and collaborate. I always want to make all family members feel like they're heard, but ultimately if there's any divide, that's the next of kin. Usually it goes spouse, children, parents, then siblings, and then miscellaneous. So having these things, even like Kevin said, having it written down and signed, a funeral director will honor that if it's by the next of kin. Even though when you look at them, they look funny, but I will honor it and I will abide by your wishes.
Thank you. As long as we're at that end of the table, let me ask you this, because it's somewhat related. My power of attorney gives my family permission to take care of my funeral arrangements.
Yeah, I'm going to have Kevin answer this mostly, again, from the funeral standpoint. Usually, power of attorney ends at death. So that's a lot of times we still refer to a blood relative who's the next of kin, unless it's a durable power of attorney, but even then there's some technicalities. So I'm going to have Kevin answer that.
Well, let's start there. There's the general power of attorney, which is just your garden variety. You can buy it in a stationery store. The general power, you authorize someone to sign documents on your behalf. With the general power, when you become mentally incompetent, for whatever reason, you're in a car accident, you're in a coma, or you've gotten to where you're not as sharp as you used to be, and you're not legally competent anymore. By definition, because it's a general power, it terminates. It's no longer effective. It's no longer valid. A durable power of attorney continues on during the incapacity of the principal. The agent continues to have authority to sign documents on behalf of the principal. But as Luke said, that terminates with the death of the principal. So really, there's two ways to go here. Get all of this stuff done while the principal is still alive, and the agent can sign those documents, and and it'll say POA in parentheses by the signature of the agent. And the other way to go is to have a trust. And in the trust, can I have a show of hands? Who has a trust here? And who doesn't? Okay, and who has nothing? Okay, well, all right, so good. You have trust. And in my trust packages, I name, when I do the durable power of attorney for financial management, I name, typically it's husband and wife for each other. Wife for the husband, husband for the wife. And then the backup person, my number one person, is the first successor trustee. And so in this situation, if the principal passes, and let's say the spouse has already passed, so the successor trustee is there with a durable power of attorney, but then that goes away with the death of the principal, but simply take off the power of attorney hat and put on the successor trustee hat, and you have all those same powers within the context of trust administration, which is what commences with the death of the trust owner. So nothing.
Okay.
Ramble on here.
I think it's time to hear from Chris. Chris, what would you say to someone who said to you, hospice care is just for people with cancer?
Certainly, there's a percentage of the individuals who have cancer. It's a lower percentage. In fact, it's probably getting lower all the time. We find that depending on the age of the individual, they may never come on hospice. It's really important to be aware that hospice, while it's an option for individuals to really have enhanced quality at the end of their life, very few people use it, considering the number of people that could benefit from it. For individuals who have cancer, very often we find that they've gone through one treatment regimen and it didn't work, or it may work for a period of time and then the cancer will resurface 5-7 years later, maybe with another site. And they go through another regimen and that doesn't work, and then they'll be offered another one and another one. And often we'll get into experimental regimens. Those individuals, when they do come onto hospice, very frequently come on very late. And we find that sometimes within the last days or weeks of their life, when they could probably least benefit from all the services that they could receive. We're seeing a real upsurge in neurological disorders. From both our hospice and just generally nationwide in hospices. And there really isn't a clear understanding of what that is. It could be environmental, and we're seeing an uptick in diseases that are along the line of Parkinson's, ALS, congestive heart failure, breathing disorders. All of those are appropriate for hospice. We're also seeing significant uptick in forms of dementia and Alzheimer's. And with dementia disorders and Alzheimer's, in order for them to qualify for hospice care in the last 6 months, it's really important to understand that that is a very slow, progressive disease. And by the time they're appropriate for a medical hospice, they've been being cared for by family for somewhere around 7 to 10 years in many cases. So their family is exhausted, and sometimes finances are exhausted as a result of it. Hospice SLO County, because we're a volunteer hospice and don't have that 6-month limitation, we often carry these individuals and support the families for years before the end of life, and support them because they are dying. They are progressing in a terminal illness slowly. They're dying naturally. There isn't a cure for their disease, and there's still quality of life at every stage of their illness. The whole point of hospice is to find that quality of life that people can still achieve so that they can still have relationships, still have a life, and still have something worth doing. But cancer certainly is a small piece of that, not just everything on hospice.
How would you answer the comment, my doctor will just talk to me about hospice when the time comes?
If you've got that doctor, I'd like to know who that is. It is very unfortunate that that wasn't something that we spent a lot of time talking and teaching in medical school. It's something that now is starting to happen. There are physicians who have become educators in the communities, educators in the medical field, like Atul Gawande. If any of you have ever read his book, it's called Being Mortal. He's a surgeon who had an epiphany, not only in his own life, but his own treatment of patients, about the fact that he did not have the language as a physician of knowing how to be honest with his patients and knowing how to gracefully say, we shouldn't do anything here because there's nothing I can do to fix this. And how to support those patients in being able to live the rest of their life as well as they could. Physicians don't like failing. They don't like feeling as though they don't have an answer. They don't like having these kinds of difficult and intimate conversations. And so they often avoid them. Some of the worst at doing this kind of conversation are oncologists, doctors who treat patients with cancer, because there's always something more that might work. And we've got a language barrier with physicians in that when they're having a language around, we've had success with this treatment, we don't know enough as lay people to say, define for me what success is. When you say this treatment had success, what's success? If that physician comes back and said, well, it extended this person 2 weeks, that's kind of a wake-up call, isn't it? That would be the answer in a lot of the cases.
And they're miserable the whole time.
And they're miserable, although they've been better about treating symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to help physicians out. We can't expect them to talk to us, and it's our responsibility to begin to ask more questions. So we need to lead the way and say, when you say that, give me a better definition of what you mean. What other treatment choices are there? What if I didn't do treatment? What would happen then? What would be the length of time here or here? We need to do that for ourselves. We can't trust and we can't expect the medical field to do that for us.
This is a very, very important point. All of the momentum in the healthcare system is to treat and to continue to treat. I think of it in terms of the medical machine. Once you get into the medical machine, it's really, really hard to get out. So the burden is on us as healthcare consumers to disrupt that momentum and to ask the question, what happens if I don't do this? Or is it time to consider not treating the disease, but to focus on the quality of my life and to redirect the conversation? And it often takes a very specific, clear-cut question. Don't be subtle. Ask what happens if we do nothing, and is this a time to consider hospice or other palliative care, comfort care?
Thank you, Linda. Chris, my family knows my wishes and will do what I want after I die.
Not if you don't tell them. And that frequently is the case. You know, when we were talking about wishes, about celebrations, about funerals, about end of life, those are the conversations that we train our volunteers to have. Those are the conversations that our staff has. Those are the conversations that we really try to open up for families to have with one another. When we're talking about the importance of some of the dialogue that we get involved in, we're comfortable with the fact that death is a natural event and that it's not a medical event. The medical event is the disease. Dying is a natural outcome of sometimes a medical event and sometimes just a natural happenstance of the end of a cycle. Having conversations around death, once people open themselves to it, amazing things happen. But it takes sometimes just to open the door and invite that conversation. When we have conversations with people, they begin to talk with one another about what they want. People will plan their ceremonies. They will plan their funerals together. They will have dialogue with one another and write it down. We have people who develop their death plans about how they want their final days to be, who they want to be there, and frankly, who they don't. You know, so that is something that is discussed with the family well in advance of that. You know, do they want to have a small intimate group, or do they want to have some huge on party about it? Do they want to be in their own home, or are they more comfortable being in a hospital? Those are things that are really important. It's not a right or wrong answer. It's really what's unique to that person. There are some families that, while they would want to support somebody in home, they don't feel safe doing that. I mentioned there's not somebody there around the clock. In the 1970s, there was a development of birth doulas, and those were non-medical women, and mainly women, who served other women during the period of time that they were pregnant, and then also during birth. And with birth doulas, their role was to educate them, to support them, and to be with them during the period of time that they were laboring and had their baby, and then support them for some weeks after they had their baby. Now there are death doulas or end-of-life doulas. End-of-life doulas do the same thing at the end of life that the birth doulas do at the beginning of life. It's really been a incredible transition. Hospice SLO has 32 end-of-life doulas, and we work with those individuals in the home to design the very kind of discussions that we're talking about, because you can't medicate away dying. You just can't. But people can take control of that and make it something that even their families participate in.
Thank you, Chris. So, Luke or Kevin, do you want to add to that?
No, I couldn't add.
I know that was pretty good. Okay. Linda, what would you say to the comment that age is somehow responsible for our attitude?
I'd say that I've been grumpy my entire life, as various people would tell you. The whole concept that people's attitude deteriorates as they age is one of the great examples of ageism. And the simplest definition of ageism is deciding that chronological time alone determines a person's physical condition, their emotional condition, their mental condition. And that is not necessarily the truth. Very often there is a specific underlying cause that can be addressed. And ageism in healthcare is the most obvious example of this. Doctors, in some cases, some doctors or other healthcare providers will say, you know, of course your knee hurts, you're, you know, however old that is. And one rejoinder is, okay, well, the left knee is the same age as the right knee that hurts, and it doesn't hurt at all. So you really want to press to identify the underlying cause of attitude or the healthcare condition, whatever it is, because very often it's something that can be addressed and either resolved or mediated.
Thank you.
There's a book written by Katie Butler called The Art of Dying Well. And this book is a great book for any of the ages that are in this room right now, because she talks about from our 40s and 50s through the very old of how we actually shift and change, and how we can adapt to that change, and how we can prepare and live absolutely safely and fully during the course of those changes that are really natural for all of us. You know, we're not always going to be 30 or 40 years old and live with bodies that way. And there's another expression of it's how to sage instead of age. You know, how to become wiser about what you're doing and thrive with that rather than just focusing on the aging. But it's an excellent book.
Thank you.
The Art of Dying Well, and her name is Katie Butler. You're welcome.
So Luke, what would you say to someone who's told you they already own a burial plot and that's all they need?
This surprisingly happens a lot. People go to the cemetery, buy the plot, and then tell their families it's all done, it's all taken care of, and guess what? It's not. So it's a good start, I'll tell you that. It's half of the equation. So you got to go to the funeral home. They say, you know, you buy the hole, but you need someone to put you in the hole, and I'm really good at it. So just remember that.
He's good at a hole in one.
A hole in one.
Yeah, because obviously your family, you know, they can't do that. So yeah, it's just a little reminder. That's only half the equation. Come see me or a funeral director to finish it.
Excuse me, are we going to have a question and answer?
We are. We have a couple more, and then we're going into question and answer. And I apologize, we did go over a little bit today, but gosh, there was just so much to cover. So, dying is free and easy. People fantasize that they'll die in their sleep and everything will take care of itself. Luke?
Real quick, and I think it's pretty obvious it's not true, otherwise you wouldn't be here. I would say, obviously neither free and certainly not easy. That's why, like we're talking about, plan everything ahead. So, and I like to say that I hope that you're really only working with your grief because that's going to be very overwhelming. The rest, I want it to be almost like an assembly line, in a sense that everything's being taken care of in the background while you can just work on processing, that hard thing of grief. So you're all way ahead of the curve in being here and planning for all this. Yeah.
Okay, 2 more questions. Chris, I think we're going to skip 25 because you talked about hospice isn't just about treating the dying person. So how would you address, I don't have a legacy to leave?
There's no such thing as someone not having a legacy. And I think when people talk about legacy, it's because legacy as a word seems like it's a daunting word. When we talk about a legacy really is someone having a period at the end of the sentence of who they are. Legacy is something that is an outward expression or a memory for other people about what meaning we had in our life. It's about who we were, what the impact was that we had through our presence here for other people. So for some people, a legacy may be a huge thing. It may be Kobe Bryant had a legacy that is huge and touched, millions of people. Will I have that kind of legacy? Absolutely not. However, I've had impact on people in my life, and there are ways that all people that I've dealt with in their dying, there is something that is consistent with everybody I've ever been with, and that is that they want to feel as though the time that they've been here, they've touched someone, and more than that, they'll be remembered when they're no longer here. And legacy is a way of us being able to express, yes, you are remembered. It could be as simple as a letter, or a card, or a thought, or a painting. It could be as profound as something really huge. And it can be as simple as just the words, "I'll never forget you," which can be profound for someone in their dying. So everybody has a legacy.
That's beautiful. So if anyone wants to add to it, please do. And then we're going to ask you if you could leave the audience with one parting thought, what would that be?
So that was wonderful what you said. It reminded me of my own case when my father was dying. And when you find out your dad is dying, you're not a grown-up anymore. You're a 4-year-old. My dad is dying, and what he did for us was shepherd us through that. And he let us know that he knew that this was hard for us, and he was there for us, and it made all the difference in the world. We're all worth more dead than alive, right? Everybody's heard that. There's a quick example that comes to me is a wrongful death action. I get hit by a bus crossing the street, and there's going to be a wrongful death action brought against an insurance company, and there's going to be an insurance award, and it's going to be distributed, and who's going to get it? So have something in writing so people aren't fighting about it.
And a parting thought?
Parting thought. In looking through many of these myths that we've discussed today, one common thread is you see a tendency of people to want somebody else to handle this. They want to pass on the control of what's going to happen next in this person's life. And the loss of control is, first of all, it's if you give control of your affairs to someone else, the likelihood that your affairs are going to be followed the way you want diminishes. And it's for several reasons. It could be somebody's doing the wrong thing, or somebody just didn't do it well, or circumstances intervened, or it became too expensive. And it was because you didn't take care of putting down your instructions clearly and precisely in advance. And so, as we've said earlier, you have the luxury of time right now. You can think about stuff, and you can decide about something, and then you can sleep on it. You can wake up the next day and tweak it, and you don't have the pressure of emergency situations. So that's really, it has to be, just be in control of your affairs and be clear and be loving.
I'll just say one, congratulations to all of you for even taking these steps. I've literally had people walk up to my doors, get to the door handle and just turn around. They cannot deal with it. But the fact that you're facing this is a really big deal. So I say thank you for that. And this area is, we couldn't be more blessed to be in an area with such great, I mean, there's no bad apples here. People are so friendly, they want to help you. I mean, and we have that small town feel. People just walk in my doors, we sit and chat and then talk about these things. Sometimes it takes a few visits, so what? And I find that's with most of the professionals in the area dealing with all this. So I'd say don't dwell on it too much. It'll take you down. But once you get it done, then it's done and you can get on with your life. So.
Thank you.
And your children will thank you for it.
We live in a society that tends to devalue and in fact simply not see older adults. What I encourage everyone to do is to live the end of your life, live your entire life, and to the extent that you can remind people that you are still here, you are still an important member of society, you're part of the community, do it and speak up. Live the end of your life.
I would say the thing that we didn't talk about, and they'll be coming up with another setting like this to talk about it, is Advanced Healthcare Directive. It is vitally important for anybody over the age of 18 and certainly for everybody in this room. And that really requires all of us to take a look at not so much check the box, do I want life support? Check the box, do I want CPR? Those are easy things to just check. It's really to ask yourself more detailed questions than that, which is really what is important to you in terms of how you want to live your life, what you need to be capable of doing in order to have value in your life, and to be able to feel as though you're still contributing in your life. And how do you want to be supported in doing that? Those are the kinds of things that are extremely important for all of us in a couple of things. You need to be involved and invested in your own health. You need to be your own advocate. When I said you can't count on a physician to ask you about hospice, you need to educate yourself and be willing to look at the fact of living well and living healthfully as you can, and also having control over your life. When and how are you going to decide, I'm not going to take another 6 medications for the same condition. I'm not going to go to yet another ologist for something. I'm not going to do just another thing. You need to be the decider of that. And then you need to document it. You need to let people know, and you need to have somebody that's going to be a medical spokesperson for you, that you can trust, that can speak what you want for you rather than making decisions based on what they want.
Oh, that's a great
May I
way.
have 2 minutes?
Yes, sure.
Advanced Healthcare Directive. It's such an important thing. The choice of the people that you choose to carry out your wishes. Some years ago now, there used to be 2 documents, a durable power of attorney for healthcare and a living will. Under the durable power, you authorize someone to make course of treatment decisions at a time when you're not able to make them for yourself. And living will was essentially a do not resuscitate instruction. That section of the probate code was recodified, and they updated it, took out a lot of obsolete material. And one of the things they did was they took those two documents and made it into one, which is the Advanced Healthcare Directive now. And so both of those functions are in that document. There is the section end of life decisions, and then there's this other part about course of treatment. I'm unhappy with that because they are two totally different functions and require two totally different skill sets. Just the end of life decision, that requires, at the time that this happens, there's a tremendous amount of support. The doctors say it's time. The nursing staff at the hospital say it's time. It still comes down to somebody saying, okay, do it. And what gets done is nutrition is withdrawn. They maintain pain medication, they maintain hydration, and nature takes its course. So you need somebody who can do that. And more importantly, or as importantly, someone who can live with that down the line. Not 2 weeks later or 2 months later, but 6 months later and 2 years and 4 years later. And the only, well, I shouldn't say the only time, but there was one time when this was done really well, and this was the third marriage for the husband and the second marriage for the wife. The husband had 2 children from his second marriage, and they weren't getting along too well. They were in their 20s, and they weren't getting along with the new wife. Well, they were planning their honeymoon, and he was getting a little short of breath, and they went to the doctor, and he had ALS, and the next day they came to see me. And we got to this conversation, and the fiance, who was the bride-to-be, said, well, I'm going to be number 1 on the Advanced Healthcare Directive because I'm going to be taking care of him for the rest of his life. But she said, make his children number 2 back up behind me. And when we get really close to the end, I will resign and allow them to take over that decision about handling the very final hours and days of his life, which was incredible. That was, wow, what a great idea. I mean, I really learned from that. But she was so unselfish about that. And but you see, I give you that example so that you see the pitfalls that are in there. Basically, you need someone who's going to follow your wishes, do what you want, and not impose their own agenda on that sort of thing, and somebody who can live with it afterwards.
As a final note, right now, the Alzheimer's Association estimates that 1 in 8 people in this room is going to have Alzheimer's. That's the trajectory and what we're seeing in terms of statistics. So even in an advanced healthcare directive, it's really important for us to also write into our advanced healthcare directive, what if we have significant cognitive impairment? How do we want to be, our treatment to be in the event that that happens? Because in the event that that happens, the body does not die very quickly from Alzheimer's. It is the mind that dies. So it's really important for us to have those kinds of considerations. And in some areas, Alzheimer's is higher, where we've got higher density of older folks, and unfortunately San Luis Obispo County is one of them.
Linda, can we work that into the question and answer session, because we need to move into that section?
April 16th is Advanced Healthcare Decision Day. There will be a county-wide program for people to go to public libraries and either execute an advanced healthcare directive or update their healthcare directive. So if you haven't done it or haven't done it recently, please keep that in mind.
Great. Okay, questions from the audience. Yes, please.
My wife was recently in the hospital. We gave the hospital her advanced healthcare directive, but they also wanted her to fill out and sign a pink form.
Yes.
And I asked them what takes precedent, and they told me pink form overrides the health directive, is that correct?
The pink form is only legal in an outpatient setting. So, I'm curious, was this at French Hospital
No,
or
it said Rio Grande.
in Rio Grande? It's a Dignity Hospital. I'm not sure why they are doing the Pulse. The Pulse form actually becomes activated in an outpatient setting. In the inpatient setting, it is transferred to the physician orders. So they will take the information off the Pulse form and they'll put it into the physician orders. So, yeah, they
Okay,
will
so
call,
she's out of the hospital now, what takes precedent?
pulsed.
It does. That
It
overrides
does.
her-
And it was signed by the physician, correct?
Well, she did it at home after she left.
Ha-
They lost the copy they originally.
Okay,
gave her.
then you don't have anything.
Okay,
So-
so does it have to be that doctor treated her, or could her regular physician?
Her
sign it?
regular physician should be the one that signs it. And here's the biggest issue that we find with this. One of the problems with people handing out those forms to individuals when they're getting discharged from the hospital is that those forms do not have any legal right to them, and they're null and void until they are reviewed by a physician and signed by a physician. Once that happens, then it becomes a validated PULSed form. And PULSE stands for Physician Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. It's a pink form, it's a short form. It says in the event that the person has naturally died, that they do not want attempts at CPR to bring them back to life, that they do or do not want tube feeding in the event that there's no reasonable expectation or no expectation of recovery. There's a number of different questions about that, but that needs to be signed by her physician.
It's usually used between when you're transporting
I have
somebody
one of
from
those.
skilled nursing to a
Given to me in the hospital.
for the EMTs
Apparently
to know what to
signed
do.
by the hospitalist, whatever you call him. I don't know who he was,
Yeah,
but he wasn't my doctor.
that's fine.
as such.
As long as it's signed by a physician, then
But it's only good in the hospital.
No, it's not good in the hospital. It's good on an outpatient setting. The only place in the hospital that they will review it is in the emergency room, because the emergency room is technically an outpatient department.
Okay.
Okay, so in the emergency room, if you come in with a pulse, they will not do CPR on you if you have checked off no CPR. The advantage of the pulsed is that it is an actual physician order, and the EMTs, if they respond to you and you are legally dead, you are not breathing, your heart is not working, they will not administer CPR. In other circumstances, absent that, even if you had a tattoo that said no CPR, they have to start CPR. They have to.
But then once I'm admitted into the hospital,
Then they would transfer that to a physician order that says DNR, do not resuscitate,
okay, just, okay,
automatically.
okay.
Yeah,
And
I would still
when I'm
check it.
discharged,
Huh?
is that any good when I'm discharged?
It just goes back.
And I go home?
You'll go back to the pulsed. It's still active.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what.
Once you have it, it's always active until you do another one or until you change the date or any of the information on it.
Okay.
Okay?
Questions? Ted?
So I have a trust, and a will, and a pour-over will, and it's dated. So if I update it, does it change the date? I got the look-back period for 4 years, or?
The look back period?
I don't know, that's what I call it. You have to stay for it to mature for 4 years. It has a date on it every time I get a big,
I'm not sure what you're
Okay, I'd have to show it to you then.
Ask, let's talk after the.
Next question. Let's,
This for Luke.
Gentlemen.
Can give some opinion. I think there's an organization called Central Coast Memorial Society that you prepay for funeral service. If you pay extra, it has return body if you die someplace else. Can you say anything about that?
Yeah, they're also similar to Neptune Society. Maybe they send you something in the mail. They're pre-planning organizations. They don't have any local buildings, no offices locally. They operate, they're nationwide, these big chains, right? And what they do is they contract with a crematory locally. You never actually work with the local crematory. You're just talking to these people, whether they're in, I know some are in Santa Barbara or up in Sacramento. The plans, I mean, are solid. They've been around for a long time. You know, they do try and make the process as automatic as possible once your plan is paid for. So that's what's good. The difference between them and why I always recommend the local funeral home is we have the physical location. You can always walk through the door, talk with the local funeral director, and you're dealing with us directly. The plan's the same. We still guarantee your cremation or burial, whatever you decide, once it's paid in full. So that's what's the same with, say, the Memorial Society. So either one, and I have nothing bad to say about the bigger change, whatever it's more convenient.
So it's a reputable organization.
I believe they are. I haven't had any problem. I'd say I've run into some problems with, say, smart cremation. Their legal vocabulary, whatever you want to say. Yeah, I find they confuse families, but Memorial Society, Neptune Society, very reputable companies. I have nothing against them.
Dignity.
You're right.
Yeah.
Dignity's the big corporation. They own so many mortuaries throughout the country, and one benefit to going through them is if you have a plan, you're a part of this huge nationwide network. So say if you're traveling, you're usually covered if you pass away while you're vacationing, you know, wherever you might be.
They have an option that's actually fee called body return.
Yep.
It doesn't say where it's returned to.
Yep.
So if you die in Seattle, do they just take you to a local mortuary, or do they return you to San Luis Obispo or Santa Barbara?
So it depends on the arrangements. If it's cremation, you just go to a local funeral home. It doesn't make sense to spend thousands to send you back home, as much as we'd like you back. But they do they'll do the cremation locally. It's more cost effective. If you're going to be buried though locally, that's where the extra rider, they're so great. They're really inexpensive, and they'll pay for your flight back home. Yeah, so, and these are things, again, too, we handle. Any local funeral home will have all the same access to these, policies and the same amount of coverage. So you're just dealing locally, so.
I have a few questions, guys. This has to do with my parents, because they're not getting any younger. The first one was the durable power of attorney for you, Kevin.
Yes.
That's only through a trust?
No.
No, it's not.
No.
Okay. You mentioned it.
It's part of the package, a trust package. So what you get is a trust, a one-page assignment to trust, which is a probate avoidance device for your tangible personal property. 2 wills, 2 powers of attorney for financial management, and 2 advanced healthcare records.
Okay.
But you can
You could do it outside of the trust?
most definitely.
Okay, that was a question. Secondly, this is one for you, Luke. You kept talking about the fact that people aren't covered on the funeral. So, through their insurance, without me looking at it yet, is it possible that they have full coverage, or is there going to be she's saying no, out of pocket?
Yeah, you're talking about a general life insurance policy that your parents have?
Or medical insurance?
Yeah, both.
Okay. Yeah, the funeral home isn't going to accept that directly. The reason is it can take a long time to actually be paid for our services. So most funeral homes do not take an assignment on a general life insurance policy. I can say for our firm specifically, we have the ability to take an assignment, but we're going to charge you, I believe it's now 4% of the total amount of what the service is worth. So if you're paying $2,000, it's going to be a few $100s additional. So families do tend to just want to pay out of pocket and then have the insurance company reimburse you.
On the back end.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's again why I recommend going straight to the funeral home to plan ahead. I want to say what you actually do at the funeral home is we take out a life insurance policy on you. It's just specific to the funeral home. Okay. That means your family does not file the claim. We can personally guarantee all the services that you want. Again, I would go straight to the funeral home and take care of that directly.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And last question, I know other people.
That's
want to
okay.
ask questions. We were talking about independence. Kevin, you were, Linda, you were. With the independence, it sounded like you were against it. And it did, though.
I apologize if that was the message that came through. Independence and loss of independence is the number one thing that people worry about as they age. And Americans are nothing if not independent, just by nature. We don't like to admit that we need help. We don't like to accept help. The issue that it presents as many people age is that they don't have the same abilities, physically, mentally, emotionally, that they did at a younger age.
Right.
It becomes a trade-off between, in many cases, between independence and safety. And that balance is tipped very differently by the older adult, who will almost always vote in favor of independence, even at the risk of their life and health, and their loved ones, who very much want to see them safe. Independence is essential, and it is one of the first things that gets lost in many cases as people age, because people want to take care of them. And because independence is such an essential part of our being, it's very important to recognize people's independence and allow them to exercise that to the fullest possible extent. In many cases, independence comes to mean interdependence. And I think that's where I may have gone astray, because the concept of interdependence is that in order to do what I want to do, I may need a little assistance from somebody else.
Sure. Yeah.
And getting people to recognize that assistance is not does not reduce their independence, it facilitates it, is a big challenge.
That's the truth.
Yeah, I totally agree with Linda. The way this myth was worded, the tendency that I was concerned about was independence to the exclusion of other things.
I got you.
Yes.
What happens if you have a trust? Let's say your savings checking account is not in the trust, but you've got a beneficiary. Is that a good idea or not a good idea?
Well, it's okay to have one checking account that's not in the trust, because just for flexibility. But really, you want the majority of your assets to be in bank accounts that are titled in the trust. It's not hard to do. Just go down to the bank and change the signature card. You don't even have to change the checks. It's very easy to do, and it saves a lot of...
I don't have to come and see you to do this.
Unfortunately not, no.
We have a...
Here's something that
hold on.
we run into this frequently. Please make sure that someone is on your account as a signer and that you're not the only one. Because when and if something should happen, the money that's in that account will stay in that account if there's no other person that can access it because they're not a signer on it. So banks make a lot of money on that.
So a co-signer means the same as a joint account? Joint account.
Does, basically, yeah, you need to have another signer on it.
EOD is called.
have a patient person in the back that has a question.
I have two questions for Kevin. Number one, like a few moments ago, you mentioned the package. I'd like to know the approximate cost of the package. And then number two, for a couple that's been married almost 50 years, we have one son, do we really need all of that? And we don't have deep pockets.
Well, the name of the game in California is to stay out of probate. I mean, you're going to answer your first question, the ballpark is $2,500 to $3,000, which includes everything. What drives the cost of a trust is two things: the complexity, not the value, but the complexity of the assets, and number two, the complexity of the distribution provisions. So what you've described is fairly garden variety, so that would be in the 2,500 range. But go back to what I read you from off that sheet of the statutory fee. At $200,000, you're paying $7,000 to an attorney. It's just not the way to go.
Or your child would.
Yeah.
Yes.
Continuation on the same issues and themes. If your checking and stock market accounts have a TOD, transfer on debt, I understand that does eliminate any probate.
That's correct. That's what is referred to as a non-probate transfer. It transfers under contract law, not probate law. So yes, it does avoid probate.
Okay, and second question, if you hold real estate that is in, I think it's tenants in common with right of survivorship, does that also avoid probate?
It does. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship is that, yeah. And so title is 100% in the other party, and that passes under real estate law, again, not probate law. But the mistake that some people tend to think about doing is to put their kid on title, and then joint tenancy, and then gee, now I don't need an estate plan. But the danger of that is your son gets in a car accident and there's not enough insurance, they're coming after the house.
Yeah, and that's always the problem. Now, the other thing about the durable power of attorney. Okay, now that if you die, the durable power of attorney continues, correct?
No, if you become mentally incompetent, the durable power of attorney continues. When you die, it becomes no longer effective.
Okay.
So that's when your estate planning documents take over.
Okay, what about the medical power of attorney? If you die, then you're not going to need any medical, so that would also die.
Hopefully.
At that point.
Right.
Disposition of remains.
It just goes away.
Disposition of remains.
Yeah, that's true.
Donations.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Kevin, do you also want to talk about the fact that we promised we wouldn't wrestle Nancy for control. Real briefly, that the general power of attorney does not cover healthcare decision-making. You have to have a specific...
You have to have the advanced healthcare directive.
Right.
Yes.
Great.
Except no substitute.
Now, everyone is going to be here afterwards for a while. If you have more questions, we need to wrap it up. So I hope that you all feel that you got something out of today's event, and my hope is that that you would use me as a resource if you ever need real estate services. As a downsizing coach, I have a wonderful team, and we can address the overwhelm in your situation and coordinate all the details from beginning to end. I would like to thank our panelists. You're invited today because you all share the same values that we do at Seacoast Seniors and have a desire to equip older adults and their families as we do with the knowledge that they need to make informed decisions. So we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules today. And thank you. I was going to say let's give our panelists a round of applause, but you beat me to it.